I think I discovered the worst TikTok the other day. So a while back, I kind of fell in to finance Reddit, by which I don't mean like finance in the sense of like the finance sector. I mean like personal finance Reddit. This was at a point where I didn't really have any savings or anything. I think under the age of about 25, I don't know, life doesn't seem quite as long as when you get to about 28. And then I was like, oh, I guess I actually might be around for a while, and I probably should like have some like savings or something in case things go bad. So the UK personal finance subreddit thing had this really good flowchart of like what you should do if you're trying to think about like getting your financial house in order. The thing is that kind of forum tends to attract people at opposite ends of the scale. So you get people who have got like really bad credit card debt, you know, considering declaring themselves bankrupt, and are like, help. But then you get a lot of people who are completely the other end, right? So you get people who are like, I only get paid £60,000 a year and I want to do this. How can I make it work? They'll be talking about like the tax bands, and they'll be like, oh, I'm in the higher tax band now. Is that bad? But one of the things that always comes up is the so-called £100,000 to £125,000, I think it is, quote unquote, tax trap in the UK. I took some time away from Reddit and then went back on it, and it got really weirdly right-wing again. Then I had this discussion sort of brought up in my head by seeing this TikTok, which is fantastic.
Earning £120,000 is probably one of the worst salaries you can get in the UK. Not only do you lose your personal allowance, you also are ineligible for the 30 hours free childcare, meaning it's one of the worst salaries that you can earn.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Paul saying that it's the Question Time guy reincarnated. So this is a guy who is on Question Time who earns £80,000, which, to clarify before he says it, is more than double the median salary in the UK. And this is his response.
I'd like to call out Labour as liars. I am one of them people that he will tax more, and I am nowhere near in the top 5%. So I'm calling you a liar right now, because I've read your policy. It's above £80,000, and I am nowhere near in the top 5%, let me tell you. I'm not even in the top 50%.
So to clarify, if you earn £80,000 in the UK, you are in the top 5% of the country. It's a sad truth, but it is the truth. My worry is that, you know, you see people like this and they genuinely think that their salary and their standard of living are normal, right? And that leads us in a position where you have people whose standard of living is so much higher than other people in the UK who do not get that sense of how difficult life is for other people. I see the argument a reasonable amount where people will try and make what we might call a kind of vulgar Marxist analysis in terms of saying, well, you know, anyone who earns a wage is working class, anyone who makes money primarily from profit is not. That can sometimes be a useful statement to make in terms of trying to make a political argument and win over people who otherwise might consider themselves against you, right? Telling this guy that he should vote Labour or whatever, or support left-wing parties because his relationship to the means of production is as a worker rather than as an owner. However, from like an analytical point of view, pretending that this guy's life is the same as someone who is on minimum wage, I just think that's not as useful. And I think it's always worth distinguishing between those two things, right? So to clarify, the kind of classic Marxist analysis is that you essentially have like an owner class, or the bourgeoisie, and then you essentially have like a worker class, which is your proletariat. So the sort of classic analysis is that what separates these two people is their kind of relationship to what's referred to as the means of production, right? Which in Marx's use of the term is like the stuff that is required to make goods and services. In the industrial capitalism that Marx is writing about, that's factories mostly, right? And therefore the bourgeoisie, the kind of ruling class, is the person that owns the factory. The working class people, the proletariat, are the people that work in the factory. Like this kind of analysis works really well in that kind of system of industrial capitalism where those two things are really separate. It does become a little bit more challenging in the modern day. So this guy might work for a living, right? He might not own the place that he gets his salary from. However, by the time you're earning 80 grand, you're probably in some kind of management position, and that becomes a little bit tricky. If you're in a management position, often some of your remuneration is in stocks and shares, or you are getting considerable amount paid into a pension. And in fact, most people in the UK now get an automatic pension in which, some amount of your salary goes directly to a bank to put into stocks and shares. If you've got £100 in a pension, but that pension is invested in stocks and shares, like in theory, you own a very tiny fraction of, say, Apple, right? If you have an automatic opt-in pension in the UK, you probably own a very tiny fraction of Apple or Google or whatever. People who have much larger pensions own a much larger chunk of those companies. And so there's a sense in which increasing numbers of people are in some ways part of that owning class in a very small amount. On the other end of the scale, if you work for Uber or Deliveroo and you are self-employed, an Uber driver effectively owns their own business, right, legally. And they also own the means of production, right? They own the bike that they use to get around. There's some sort of question about, well, how does the platform fit into that in terms of, is that in some ways, are they just doing piecework? And therefore they're kind of not really business owners. So so much of that model has become confused. And always has been to some extent. I think it's worth saying that that's not something that suddenly happened. So there is some logic to this tax trap thing. But to be someone who complains about that, you do have to be in an incredibly good position. And it is certainly not one of the worst salaries in the country.